you really want conflict, and I don't say this with any jest in mind, the Kulturkampf, the culture war, the clash of civilization now, and this is not being in any way conservative or reactionary or hysterical, it is between what we value very dearly and often take for granted: progress, pluralism, coexistence, the right to speak your mind, to offend others if needs be, and Islam. And not just fundamentalist Islam, but I would argue mainstream Islam, which is a very different view and notion and perception of what a perfect world would look like. And pretend as you will, this clash is developing and will develop all the further, including in Canada. One of the finest and bravest observers and commentators on this situation is Robert Spencer. Jihad Watch is his website. He's written many books. I recommend that you read them and go to his blog and his site. Robert, how are you?
Just great, Michael. Thank you. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. As always, we don't explain exactly where you are in the US because you get numerous death threats. Now, when I introduce this as a clash of cultures, you know there are many, many people, maybe most people out there who will say, oh, no, he's just trying to exploit the situation. We're all going to be fine. Are we all going to be fine, Robert?
Well, no, and you're absolutely right. It is certainly a clash of cultures, but the reaction that you described, Michael, is very, very common. That when people like you and me sound the alarm about this, people routinely say that we're being alarmist, that we're making this up. But what's really strange about it is that, you know, all I do at Jihad Watch, for the most part, is quote what Islamic jihadis and Islamic supremacists are saying and report on what they're doing. Just today, I put up a story about a man in Germany who I met while I was speaking in Germany last summer, Michael Mannheimer. And he said that Islam had a program for conquest and was working to take over Europe. And he was arrested and prosecuted and found guilty of inciting hatred and fined. Now the thing about it is that it's very easy to find Islamic clerics, including Sheikh Qaradawi, the most prominent Muslim cleric in the entire world, saying Islam is going to conquer Europe and we have this program for conquest. And so when Qaradawi says it, it's fine. But when Mannheimer says it, or Coren says it, or Spencer says it, or any other freedom fighter says it, then suddenly it becomes hysteria or hate speech. And the double standard and the willful blindness, they're obvious.
Well, we were chatting to Mark Stein on the show, and we referred to what happened after the murder, the slaughter of the innocents in France. And it's happened every time there is an Islamic terror attack. The immediate response is Muslims fear backlash, that the people who committed the crime fear that the victims might turn around and say, we're very angry with you. Actually, that seldom happens. I'm amazed at the self-restraint in Britain and the US and Canada and France. But it's always a focus on Islamic fears rather than the reality of Islamic aggression.
Universally, every time. I track this at Jihad Watch. I've done it for almost 10 years now. And I see it again and again and again, that it's really uncanny, that it seems to be some sort of a very crystallized and clear program that this is their response in the mainstream media to Islamic jihad plots and attacks. There always is the focus on backlash. There always are imams, stories about imams calling for extra police protection at mosques. We had just recently the president of France, in the wake of this attack in Toulouse, he calls for extra security at synagogues and at mosques. And you think, you're absolutely right, Michael. There's never been any significant backlash. I remember a poor man, a Sikh, who was murdered by somebody who thought he was a Muslim not long after 9/11, and a handful of other incidents, people being rude and yelling at people. That's the kind of thing you see in the Council on American Islamic Relations Hate Crimes report, but no real backlash. And, you know, Americans, Canadians, Western Europeans, they're decent people who are not going to go and victimize innocents as the result of jihad plots and attacks. This is an attempt, a program, as I say, to shift the focus away from the attack itself and from the mass murder committed at that Jewish school last week in the name of Islam and avowedly according to Islamic texts and teachings, and to shift the focus onto Muslims as victims so that we will stop paying attention to what the jihad is trying to do to us and accept their narrative that Muslims are some sort of victimized community that needs special protection and has to not be subject to the ordinary scrutiny that any group would be subject to under the law.
Yeah. The days following the murder in France, and let's remind ourselves that this man who was completely directly connected to jihadism, whose brother praised him for the attack, whose family refused to condemn him, who has for years now gone to al-Qaeda sites and been trained by various people and visited the heartland of Islamic terror. He shot Jewish children dead. It wasn't a child, it was Jewish children. One of the girls ran away, a tiny little girl. He pulled her by the hair, he pulled her back, looked at her, videoed her as he put a gun to her temple and blew her entire brains out of her head. Now, the following day, we had a teacher in a French school who wanted a minute's silence for him because he died when the police went to get him. We've had another attack. A little Jewish kid was attacked coming out of a school by a Muslim gang. We've had endless comments by people in the Islamic world saying, we refuse to condemn this man, he's a martyr. But yet again, we have these usually liberal, empty-headed people who think they're being sensitive by saying, we have to understand both sides of the situation. We don't try and empathize with the rapist. We look to the victim of the rape.
Yeah, well, you know, Michael, we have to empathize with both. We have to understand both sides of the situation. I'll tell you, I think that we understand both sides of the situation very well. That we understand that this man arose in a culture and imbibed and breathed it in deeply that glorifies death and hatred, that sets up the Jews as the worst enemies of the Muslims, as the Quran says in chapter 5, verse 82, and that glories in the blood of Jews. And that then we have another culture of Western leftists who think that they are being multicultural and tolerant when they make excuses for this man or when they actually set him up, as that French schoolteacher did, as some sort of a paragon or hero. And this is monstrous. We understand it very well, and we are some of the few people who actually dare to call it what it is, but that's exactly what it is. It's monstrous, it's horrific, and well, I thank you for your stand for honesty. It's unfortunately very rare.
Well, it is, but the fight goes on, and on Sun News and all the shows here, I can guarantee, and all the people who are committed to freedom and to decency and to pluralism, and you, sir, will continue to be a guest on the show. Thank you so very much indeed.
Thank you, Michael.